destination. It's all good. It's a winter storm in Buffalo. More than one way. We're gonna talk about it. Give an opportunity for the team to get in here. Let's talk about it. My files in 3 minutes. They asked me what ashy classy still. They asked me I went from ashy to classy and still. Let's talk about it. My files. Midday. Before I get my run on. 2 minutes. What's going on? How y'all doing? I appreciate y'all joining me midday. I know it's early, specifically early for me here Central Time, but why not, right? You obviously had your typical beat reporters already chime in, and those who consistently do podcasts already chime in. So I figured I'd give you guys my 2 cents on what I saw from the press conference of Terry Pegula and Brandon Beane as it is related to them dismissing Bill's former head coach Sean McDermott. It was an interesting press conference to say the least. I haven't seen Terry Pegula that animated, if you can call it that, ever. He was interrupting, being a little bit, chiming in things that he's never really. I can't recall a time where I seen Terry Pegula be that aggressive, for lack of a better term, in a press conference. But he was aggressive. He was deliberate, and he came to the defense of Brandon Beane at times. The press conference started out with them thanking uh, three-star Admiral uh, Sean McDermott, thanking the Admiral for all that he did for Buffalo Bills over 9 years, the drought, thanking him for his contribution to the community, thanking him for bringing them out of the basement of the NFL. That's how it started off. Terry Pegula started off the press conference. He then started to go into the reason why, or maybe he was asked the question, why did you decide that it was the time to relieve Sean McDermott? And he said, and that's kind of surprising to me that he said, and press conferences and press clippings and what a person says in a moment may not doesn't give them the time to deliberate their thoughts so that it's you know conveyed necessarily in the manner in which they wish to have conveyed it. So I kind of think some of his responses were in the moment. I think all of them were true, but I think if he can answer it a different way and probably, I don't know, some way articulate it in a fashion that was more, um, you know, in a different fashion, he would have. But they asked him why, what led to the firing of Sean McDermott. He started to go into, hey, it was the Denver Broncos game, the results of the game. And that was surprising to me, because it was, and also asking, when did you started to contemplate it? And he said when he was in the locker room, and when he first looked at Josh Allen, saw Josh Allen's face and him crying and, not acknowledging Terry and Terry saying it was a catch and Josh Allen, not being, um, not giving him any acknowledgement. He looked at the rest of the players and he felt that they had reached the proverbial, in his own words, the proverbial playoff wall. And that was interesting that in that moment when he went into the locker room, he had at that moment realized to himself throughout the history of the 7 playoff years, or maybe 8 playoff years, 8 playoff years, because he missed them in his first year, that it was that specific game and specific moment that he had realized that they had reached the playoff wall when he looked at the men. That's interesting because I felt the playoff wall to me came probably the Bengals game. Probably the Bengals playoff game is where I was done with Sean McDermott's coaching style. Not 13 seconds, right? Because you had to ask yourself, how many times has Sean McDermott actually been in a moment before 13 seconds to, exercise or show us his game management ability? And we didn't have a large body. We had a few playoff games, but we didn't have a large body of evidence that had informed us that this guy didn't have what it takes. And what it takes, meaning, can be various different components, a lot of different variables to get us over the hump. And so it was around the Bengals game or a little bit before that. And to me, it was even in the regular season. there was evidence that Sean McDermott, from a game management perspective, from a developmental perspective, and first, let me say, I'm not here to bash, he's fired. He's no longer the thorn in my side in terms of Buffalo Bills football. He's dismissed, so I'm not here to bash him anymore. I don't have a reason to bash Sean McDermott. Um, but I started to realize that his game management skills, that he was too analytical. Sometimes you could get paralysis by analysis, meaning when you should throw the flag, when you only have 10 seconds or 5 seconds, or you need that split decision, Sean McDermott is really going through the process and the reasoning in his head of should he? Is he's waiting on too many people to confirm from, wherever they're sitting in the booth or his coaches, and then and then when it came to timeouts, it never seemed that he had a feel for when to throw and when to call a proper timeout. It was just not just those little things, but it was just a multitude. And then he was a defensive head coach, and you never seen him with any. There was no indication that he had any imprint in terms of the offense, in terms of the scheme. Yeah, I'm sure say, hey, I want to run the ball here a little bit more. I would like us to do this, that, and the third when it comes to offense. But there was no indication that Sean McDermott actually added value on the offensive side, and therefore you attribute everything on the defensive side to Sean McDermott. And if you're a defensive head coach, then I should be able to count on you to deliver some sort of scheme, give us some sort of scheme that can slow down these teams in the playoffs. I and what you'll watch oftentimes, if you go back, at least this is my perspective, this is the my files, and I'm giving you guys my views, and you can disagree with it. I appreciate your audience. But you'll see in the regular season, and then sometimes the stats lie to you. Hey, the Bills is a top X defense, but really they were slowing down teams they were supposed to slow down, and the teams that had high power offenses with veteran quarterbacks who knew how to read zone defenses and who were willing to stand in the pocket and take what the defense was giving them, was able to have productive huge days against the Bills, specifically in the playoffs after you've seen repeatedly 30-point games in the playoffs time and time again against the Buffalo Bills. This was a repetitive thing. So, with the defense not being reliable in the playoffs, including a 13-second game in overtime against Cincinnati, multiple games, the whole organization was relying on a side of the ball that necessarily wasn't Sean McDermott's specialty. We became an offense reliant team. Winning was dependent on an offense outscoring the other team. Now, part of that, and we'll get into that because that's part of the interview, part of what Pegula was talking about. Now, part of that is talent, right? There's multiple components, and there's coaching, there's talent, there's execution. There's all of those things that go into it. Um, But from my perspective, I started to definitively believe Sean McDermott wasn't the guy somewhere in that season, right after 13 seconds leading into that Bengals playoff game. And I've been on my soapbox for a very long time now, trying to inform people, hey, Sean McDermott's the problem. And then, you had that, I don't know, that journalistic piece by Tyler Dunn about Sean McDermott's philosophy and his way of leading that people called a hit piece, and at the same time we all rooted for Sean McDermott. He was a community guy, stick up for Buffalo. The tragedy that happened in the shooting, he was what you wanted in the coach, in the community, such as Buffalo, believing in the town. And even if he didn't, he still gave us the message that Buffalo was his town. That's what we wanted. We wanted someone who's completely sold on the town, and Sean McDermott delivered that, and he did an excellent job. You cannot take away him bringing the Bills out of the 17-year drought. You can't take away the 5 AFC championships. You can't take away the playoff appearances. You can't take away the 97 wins and the 50 losses. You can't take away any of that from Sean McDermott. But after a while, like all things, the expectations rise. There wasn't just at first it was just get us to being relevant again, get us to playing good football again, get us to the playoffs again. And he did that. He did that. He got the Bills to the playoffs, made them relevant, and they was playing good football. And then they got to the championship game. Then after they got to and all the while the expectations was building. And what expectations build, so do what you delivering have to build. You started he started to build his own expectations, right? If you bring in a company savings and you're starting to build the expectation that hey, you brought us, you delivered us 2 million, 4 million, 6 million in savings, and let's just say 10 million is the goal, um, your stakeholders or whomever it may be is going to look for you to reach that at some point. And when you repetitively bring in the same kind of results, um, and not necessarily reaching the ultimate objective of your stakeholders, they haven't forgotten what you've done and how you have developed and grown the organization. They haven't forgotten that. But the thirst for getting better, the thirst for moving forward is always going to be there. And I think that's a good thing and a bad thing at the same time, especially in today's NFL when you're watching head coaches such as Ben Johnson. And and I don't want to skip above. I do think that that moment that Terry Pegula is describing in the playoffs in Denver probably came a year too late because I really like Ben Johnson, what he's doing in Chicago. And I really like Mike Vrabel out in New England in terms of their coaching style. And I wish that we had an opportunity to get one of those guys to coach the Buffalo Bills because there's amazing coaches. And I think both of them will be there for a very long time. I just think it's just, and now this pool of candidates, you know, and we can get into predictions and all of that maybe on some other show of who we think the Bills, all of that. But Terry came by looking at the players, by in his mind asking himself, how can we get over the hump? He, in his own words, determined that it was time for Sean McDermott to go as the head coach. And then they started to move into Brandon Beane's draft selection because the media and this media is wild to me. The same media that be praising these guys is the same media who will and they asked a lot of questions. Where do I start? Let's just say, yeah, let's start with the personnel decisions, right? About Keon Coleman, which was a big thing, which Terry's not in front of being in front of a used to being in front of a mic, and he wanted really to defend Brandon Beane, saying, "Hey, this was the pick of Keon Coleman," and he wasn't thinking about the consequences of Keon Coleman hearing this message. How would Keon Coleman feel? Is things. I think Terry his simple message was that was the Keon Coleman pick was a collaborative thing. It wasn't just Brandon Beane. It wasn't just the pro personnel department picking a wide receiver. That oftentimes in the draft, the coach has influence on the decisions of who's going to be picked and who isn't going to be picked. That was his ultimate message. How it came across was the coaches wanted Keon. Don't blame that on Brandon Beane, right? I mean, if you're taking it for face values, it sounds very negative. You know what I'm saying? If you're taking it for what it was, then you come away with the perception that, hey, that's Sean McDermott and the wide receivers coach and Joe Brady who wanted Keon Coleman. But really, I think Terry was just simply trying to come to the defense of his now embattled GM. And it was asking him you know, why fire Sean and not both? I thought they were married at the hip. Isn't the collection of talent and the results a collective failure of both Sean McDermott and Brandon Beane. Yes, it is a collective failure. I mean, and Brandon would sit there oftentimes and would say that when you're playing a high price quarterback, when you're paying top dollar for a quarterback in the league, you got to make some sacrifices in terms of the roster. And I was watching this one commentator today that said, well, there is multiple teams across the league who are now paying top dollar for quarterback whose roster is still better than the Buffalo Bills. Why is the Bills roster so depleted when relative comparatively to the uh other rosters in the league who are paying top quarterbacks? It is a collective failure. And right, and I've been kind of wrestling with the fact, is it I want a Sean McDermott move, but I never really thought about Brandon being too much from a critical perspective of whether he should lose his job. And over the last few days, I have come to the point where I think that the proper thing probably would have been to relieve Brandon Beane as well. Because when you keep seeing it on TV day after day that there's only been two Pro Bowlers drafted out of 50 something players after Josh Allen, and you only got two Pro Bowlers, you're like, wow. But the Pro Bowl is in itself, in terms of the voting and how players get there, kind of skew that. Because I guess the question is, who was Pro Bowl deserving? What player is doing Beans that was drafted by Bean was deserving of making a Pro Bowl? Is there more? Because the fans and, kind of determine who's a Pro Bowler and who isn't, and it's somewhat become of a popularity contest. So I don't know if that's a true metric or an indication of the performance of the actual players themselves. Um, so, but notwithstanding, two out of 50 something is still a significant number of not having any participants or lack of participants in the Pro Bowl. And then when you're looking on the defensive side and you're looking at the depth in a wide receiver, and that WGR interview didn't go over well. At the time, you could check out the lab mod files. And I talked about this. I was kind of in agreement with Brandon Bean in his interview to WGR because going into the season, we were averaging 30 points per game without a number one receiver last year, and we made the AFC Championship game. So you're sitting above in your offense, or excuse me, you're sitting above in the front office, and your offense is averaging 30 points per game without a bona fide number one wide receiver, and you've seen a precedent set with Patrick Mahomes and other elite quarterbacks being able to operate outside of having a bona fide, certified number one receiving threat. We've seen it done, and Josh Allen and the team just gave you 30 points per game last year and made the play. So I understood his perspective being where he was coming from when he gave that interview, but in hindsight, looking back, you got to see now the interview looks terrible given the results of what we watched this season. The lack of separation created by receivers, Keon Coleman, missing practice, or the alleged disciplinary situations he had, and then it's just like the cupboard was bare with no talent for Josh Allen to throw to. And so when you people are going to go back and rewind that of you saying he didn't need a one wide receiver, and as the GM, he kind of got stuck when they asked him the question, do you regret that? I don't think he should regret it. I think that's how he felt at the time. The evidence at the time would have supported his argument. It doesn't The evidence now doesn't support his argument, but at the time of the interview, prior to going into the season, the evidence in terms of the wide receivers, in terms of the offensive capability, had informed you that a number one wide receiver wasn't necessarily necessary in order for them to have a prolific offense. That's what the evidence supported. Now, And so it talked about Brandon Beane's promotion in the coaching search and things of that nature. And one thing I found interesting was Brandon said we're going to operate very, very similar to how we've been operating. You know that the title of president football operations and overseeing the coaching staff ha- may not have an effective uh, you know, effect on how they currently operate. So it's going to be very interesting from that aspect. Terry was ready to go today. He was calling out bad call and all this, and um, he was fired up. I like Terry. People have been bashing him from the owner's perspective, and the Sabres is a completely different entity than the Buffalo Bills, in my opinion. And I think that it was time. It was time, and I think it's all about writing a story, though, right? Like, if we all agree that it's time, then there's nothing to write about. But if we can write a story that say, "Hey, McDermott was done dirty," they called him admiral instead of saying he had an admirable. It's just more clicks, more debate, more controversy, and that's what we feed off of as a society is controversy when it comes to these type of topics. I think that really it was just time. It probably has been time for like 2 to 3 years. He's actually late a little bit, in my opinion, right? Because now I think the best coaching prospects is off the board. It was very, very interesting. They say that Josh was informed after the decision, and that Josh is, wasn't significantly. There's no significant. Josh is going to be the quarterback, so it's interesting. It's all interesting. Where are we? 27 minutes. Um, what's hard to watch is Buffalo right now is going through something that's necessary for it, though. It's people are saying Buffalo's a dumpster fire and Terry Pegula and this Brandon Bean being promoted, it smells and all of these different opinions about this organization is going downhill. I think this is necessary. Anytime you fire a successful coach, it's going to be people on the left and the right. It's a necessary transition. Until they kick that ball off in September, until there's just speculation of who's the next coach, and then there's going to be speculation. Let's just say if they hire someone who the fan base is iffy about. Let's just say they hire David Webb or whatever. You're like, oh, he's never coached before. He's never been a head coach before. He's just a quarterback coach, so forth and so on. Until Davis Webb start winning, there's going to be that space to speculate, to doubt. So, and then they hire Brian Dable. I'm like, is it it's not an upgrade from Sean McDermott. He's good with Josh Allen, but can he? We saw what happened in New York. He's failed in New York until they start winning. If they hire Bill Belichick, oh, why they you hiring another defensive mind? I thought that you wanted to pair Josh Allen with an offensive mind. There's going to be, no matter what goes on in the next 6 months, there's going to be this speculation, doubt, and questioning of the moves that is being made at One Bills Drive. I'm happy that we got an owner who is willing and able and um showing the gall to make tough decisions. He said he wanted to thank Sean for the sentiments and the kind words when Kim was going through her ordeal, the sudden cardiac arrest, you know, and to let a man go, despite your affinity for them on a personal level, when it's all business, shows me what Terry Pegula is about. He's about a championship, and Buffalo should be proud to have an owner who is willing to move it forward even when you're having relative success. You gotta continue to try to move it forward. You gotta always reach for the next level. You gotta always reach for the next level. And that's what it's about. And these people, these beat writers and internal media of the Bills, they got too close. It's been 9 years. Sean thanking them and talking to them on a personal level, hugs and golf tournaments and all of that. They didn't write anything negative about Sean. I mean, you get these questions here and there, but there was nothing out there. They didn't even focus on what was the main objective. Is the Bills moving forward? When you went into the offseason year after year, at the 13 seconds, it's like, and the question, let's just ask this question: did the Bills move forward? When you ask yourself the question, did Buffalo move forward? After the Bengals lost next year, were we moving forward? After the Chiefs divisional loss, were we? It just seemed like we were putting the same team, add a couple veterans on the field, and hoping somehow we were going to beat Mahomes. Even this year, even with Mahomes out, with Lamar out, with Burrow out of the playoffs, with going against the Jaguars, Bo Nix or Drake May eventually. It just seemed like we were hoping. But growing up as a kid in the 90s, it felt like we were going to the Super Bowl. It felt like a right. It felt like it was an expectation to go to the Super Bowl. You cannot say in the last 5 years you expected the Bills to go to the Super Bowl. You felt like they could, like it was on the board, it was a possibility. But oftentimes, after those tough playoff losses, you felt like we didn't necessarily we tweaked the roster a little bit, but you didn't see those moves, Brandon Beane, that moved the team to the next level. And then you would trot out this nickel-based defense, this nickel dominant defense, 80% of the time. Even, they you I read the or I listen to the pressers of other teams all the time when it came to Sean McDermott's defense. They said, you know what you're gonna get. The Bills do what they do. They try to disguise it, but they do it. And so year after year, we knew Sean McDermott was going to be heavy nickel, irrespective of whether he's playing a running team, and you knew he was going to play zone all the time. You knew what you were going to get. I think I got a meeting. A few minutes. This is what you do. Um, you knew he was going to play nickel and zone all the time. And so year after year, you felt like they tweaked the roster. But the playbook was coming back the same. Then he bring in these inexperienced coaches. And even if you like these coaches, and people try to argue with me about, hey, Brady is experienced. And then they really didn't have an argument for Babbage. But when I'm talking about experience, the Spagnola type experience, Lou Anaromo, and I know I don't mess his last name up, his type experience, the type of offense and defensive coaches that have skins on the wall to get you there. You needed a transformational figure, and you brought in inexperienced coaches. And so when you get too many men on the field, or you call in defensive plays that don't necessarily get you the results that you're looking for, you can look it back and check out the experience of the coaches. Sean McDermott didn't do himself any favors by hiring inexperienced coaches. He wanted to control it. It's one of those things in life, and I tell people this all the time. It's one of those things in life you're gonna learn either the easy way or the hard way. And I've been in hiring positions and I hire people all the time. Until you start hiring people who are smarter than you and more capable than you will never understand what it is to take an organization to great levels. Everybody who's successful in business understand is you surround yourself with people who are smarter than you, not people that you have an intellectual advantage of or senior that you can just bully around. And bullies a term, a negative term, and I'm not trying to use that term. But Sean McDermott was using his leverage of their inexperience to run that organization. It was time for him to go. It was time for him to go. It's time. How it's playing out is kind of how it played out probably isn't the preferred way. The spelling errors in the statement, the reports and all that, the Denver game and Keon Coleman and his name being, this is not how you expected it to be, like a walk off, like kind of like Tomlin, and the Steelers decided to part ways, stepping down. That's how you would like to see it. Um, but I don't necessarily think that's Terry's fault. He's a huge organization, and you know, I think the person who misspelled that should probably lose their job, unfortunately. Okay. So, and we had it. There's your evidence about the draft. It was a collaborative effort. Now, the question remains how much culpability and responsibility Beane has. It remains. And Terry said it himself. He could be wrong. So why you keep Beane? He said, I got confidence in him, but I could be wrong. I like that. Right next to the man. Right next to him. Been you've been he been working with you for 9 years, and like I could be wrong. That's intelligence right there. Intelligence informing you that it respective of how you feel about a situation, everything is still under evaluation. Brandon Beane is still under evaluation. He will be reevaluated over time. Right now, he's made the decision to keep Brandon Beane on board. But I bet you, if I'm Brandon Beane and I want to be the GM of the Buffalo Bills, this offseason is going to be different. We're going to go out and we're going to find some talent that's going to help us compete. He's going to bring in quality wide receivers. I don't even think we even need to question that. I would be surprised if the Bills, if this, if Brandon Beane doesn't have one hell of a off season. Now, what that looks like, given the cap constraints, who knows? But I'd be surprised if Brandon Beane don't make moves that's going to that's going to get people excited. I really do think, and I honestly, when it comes to the new coach, should I speculate right now? I only got a few minutes. Got a meeting to attend. Not only that, I am in the middle of the work day, like everybody else. Um, my pick, yo, what's wild is that I think, given the coaching candidates, because none of these guys, I think Clint Kubiak would be a good pick for the Buffalo Bills as a fresh start offensive guy from Seattle, proven off. I like that. Now, if you can't get him, I think Brian Dable being, irrespective of what happened in New York, we know that he can run an offense. He's an offensive mind. You pair him with a great defensive coordinator, and who knows? Is it an upgrade? I don't know. Do you really? It's not about upgrading from Sean McDermott. It's about not being Sean McDermott, right? It's about being able to not have paralysis by analysis. And so I like the Brian Dable prospect. I don't like Davis Webb prospect. Joe Brady staying in house. I wouldn't be mad at it, but I don't like it. It doesn't come off fresh to me. I thought his offense was very limited at times in terms of creativity. Um, but I don't really like these candidates throughout this year. I wish this would have happened last year, as most people would tell you that they knew that I don't want him going line. And and Ben Johnson was on the board. I really like that guy. Um, Mike Vrabel. Wild card. Would I be mad at a Bill Belichick? I don't think I would be mad at a Bill Belichick coming in here. Uh, for a few years, if Bill, and if Bill's getting up in age, so it'll only be temporary situation. We'll talk more about that here on the Mount Files. I wanted to give y'all my quick opinion on that press conference that happened. I might pop back on later tonight. But I appreciate your time. Y'all have a good day.